am furious that I grew up feeling disenfranchised, that there was some reason that someone thought that I was less than they were in the human experience.
What are you worried about?
Am I going to work again? It's always what I worry about. Am I going to have to go and learn how to drive a cab, or maybe...
At 88 years, Morgan Freeman still fears he'll have to drive a cab again. This is trauma from decades of systematic rejection. For him, one question about black representation in a production could end your career.
But that was the wrong thing to say. You know, you can hear the room shut up, you know.
They think you were a troublemaker? They think...
Apparently, that was the kind of rep I was beginning to get.
Even after achieving legendary status, Freeman returned to his home in Mississippi, where racial separation persisted.
They have two separate proms, black prom and white prom. These kids are not allowed to touch.
Today, he carries physical pain, emotional scars, and the burden of success in an industry built to exclude him. This is the hidden pain behind Hollywood's most recognizable voice. Morgan Freeman entered the world on June 1, 1937, in Memphis, Tennessee, during the height of the Jim Crow era. This was a daily reality that would shape every aspect of his worldview and career trajectory. The segregated South didn't just limit where black children could eat or go to school, it systematically destroyed their dreams before they could even form them.
I developed the idea somewhere in my growing up that being a Southerner and the offspring on one side of my family of slaves, I decided that you can't be a slave unless you are party to it.
This philosophy didn't develop in a vacuum. Freeman grew up watching his community navigate a system designed to dehumanize them. The slave mentality he referenced wasn't theoretical. It was what he witnessed daily as black adults submitted to degrading treatment simply to survive. But while others accepted their assigned place, Freeman was developing a dangerous idea: that he deserved better. The segregated South of Freeman's childhood offered black children a stark choice: accept your assigned place in the racial hierarchy, or face potentially violent consequences for stepping out of line. Most chose survival over resistance. Entertainment and performance were not realistic career paths for black men from the South. The few black performers who achieved national recognition were either comedians playing stereotypical roles or musicians whose success was carefully contained within acceptable boundaries.
Black kids are home listening to their parents talk about white people. Same way the white kids at home listen to their parents talk about black people.
This mutual conditioning created the perfect system of separation that Freeman would encounter throughout his life. Even decades later, living in Mississippi, he would witness this same pattern playing out with a new generation of children who attended integrated schools but maintained completely separate social lives. The hatred was taught and reinforced in every home, creating an endless cycle of division. Freeman's family moved frequently during his childhood, living in Memphis, Chicago, and eventually settling in Mississippi. Each location offered its own version of racial restrictions and limitations. The constant message was clear: know your place, stay in your lane, and be grateful for scraps. But Freeman was drawn to performance from an early age. He participated in school plays and discovered natural talent for inhabiting different characters. However, available roles were strictly limited, typically servants, comic relief, or one-dimensional supporting characters that reinforced racial stereotypes. The education system was deliberately designed to prepare black students for manual labor, not artistic careers. This foundation of systematic exclusion would follow Freeman into his professional life. The entertainment industry was one of American racism's most powerful enforcement mechanisms. But Freeman's early understanding that you can't be a slave unless you are party to it would eventually put him on a collision course with an industry built on black compliance and white control. Those dangerous questions that Freeman learned to ask as a child in the segregated South would cost him dearly once he reached Hollywood. While his contemporaries were building careers and establishing themselves in the entertainment industry, Morgan Freeman spent decades in professional limbo, existing in that cruel space between having undeniable talent and finding anyone willing to recognize it. The same defiant spirit that helped him survive Jim Crow would mark him as a troublemaker in an industry that demanded Black performers stay grateful and quiet. Freeman's journey included years on The Electric Company, the PBS children's show where he played multiple characters, including Easy Reader. While this provided steady work and showcased his versatility, it also typecast him in family-friendly roles that limited his opportunities for dramatic work. Industry executives couldn't envision the man who taught children to read as a serious dramatic actor. More importantly, they didn't want to.
Over the years, Freeman says there were parts he didn't take or wasn't offered because of questions he asked about the number of blacks in a production or how blacks would be portrayed.
But that was the wrong thing to say. You know, you can hear the room shut up.
Those questions about Black representation weren't academic inquiries. They were challenges to the fundamental power structure of Hollywood. When Freeman asked why there were so few Black people behind the camera, he was exposing the systematic exclusion that the industry preferred to keep invisible. When he questioned how Black characters would be portrayed, he was refusing to accept the stereotypical roles that white writers created for Black performers. The financial pressure during these wilderness years was crushing. Freeman worked as a mechanic, served in the Air Force as a radar technician, and took countless odd jobs to survive between acting opportunities. Each job was a reminder that his artistic dreams might never materialize into sustainable income. The decades of struggle created a permanent anxiety about financial security that would never completely disappear, even after massive success.
Well, it didn't happen for you right away.
No, it did not.
It did not.
It took a while.
Yeah.
It didn't start until 86,
How old were you then?
50. I
So,
was 49 when I did the
49 years old when his breakthrough finally came. Most actors consider their careers over by that age if they haven't achieved significant success. Freeman had spent decades taking whatever work he could find, stage productions that paid barely enough to cover rent, television guest spots that led nowhere, and film roles so small they barely registered. The industry had systematically wasted his prime years, and everyone knew it. During this period, Freeman developed the work ethic and psychological resilience that would later serve him well. But he also accumulated decades of rejection, near misses, and financial stress that left permanent psychological scars. The fear of returning to manual labor never completely disappeared. Even with Oscar nominations and Golden Globe awards, Freeman would still worry about having to drive a cab again.
I see people that walk in the streets now and I think, been there, done that. And you know, you just keep tap dancing, something good will happen. Don't sit down and say I can't, because then you can't.
It wasn't enough to be talented. You had to constantly audition, network, remain optimistic, and present yourself as grateful for any opportunity, no matter how small or degrading. The phrase also carried the weight of Black entertainers who had literally tap danced for white audiences throughout American history. Freeman's persistence during this period required an almost superhuman level of faith in his own abilities. Every audition could be his last chance. Every small role had to be treated as if it might lead to something bigger. The mental energy required to maintain hope while facing constant disappointment was exhausting. By the mid-1980s, Freeman had essentially aged out of traditional leading man roles. At an age when most actors are considering retirement, he was still fighting for his first real opportunity to demonstrate his dramatic range. The industry's combination of ageism and racism created nearly insurmountable barriers. But Freeman's decades in the wilderness had taught him something that his more successful contemporaries never learned: how to survive when the system is designed to destroy you. This hard-won knowledge would serve him well when Hollywood finally decided to give him a chance. The survival skills Freeman developed during his decades in the wilderness, the ability to endure rejection, maintain dignity under pressure, and perform excellence without recognition, finally paid off in 1987, but in ways that revealed just how arbitrary and cruel the entertainment industry could be. Street Smart changed everything, yet it also demonstrated how the system had wasted decades of Freeman's potential while forcing him to accept exactly the kind of stereotypical role he had spent years trying to avoid. Freeman's performance as Fast Black, a violent pimp in Street Smart, was revelatory. Critics who had dismissed him as a children's television performer suddenly recognized his dramatic range and intensity. The role earned him his first Academy Award nomination, but the irony wasn't lost on Freeman that his breakthrough came from playing exactly the type of character that reinforced rather than challenged racial stereotypes. Fast Black was a criminal, violent, and ultimately disposable, the kind of black character that white audiences felt comfortable watching suffer and die. But Freeman brought such depth and humanity to the role that he transcended the limitations of the script. He found ways to suggest the intelligence and pain beneath Fast Black's violent exterior, creating a performance that was both commercially successful and artistically honest. The industry finally recognized his talent, but only when he demonstrated it through a role that confirmed their existing prejudices about black men.
Warhol was right. Never all of us are going to be famous for 15 minutes.
What would the Oscar mean to you?
It's not payment. You can't take it and melt it down and pay your rent for the next year. You can't hold it up and say, cab, take me downtown.
Even with Oscar recognition, Freeman understood that success in Hollywood was fragile and temporary. The same industry that had ignored him for decades could easily discard him again. Awards provided prestige, but not security. The decades of financial struggle had taught him that recognition didn't guarantee steady work or protect against the industry's fundamental racism and ageism. Driving Miss Daisy in 1989 seemed like the perfect follow-up, a prestige project that showcased Freeman's ability to bring dignity to potentially demeaning material. His performance as Hoke Colburn was masterful, but it also represented exactly the kind of role that black actors were expected to be grateful for: the faithful servant who teaches white characters important life lessons through his wisdom and patience. Freeman navigated this contradiction with remarkable skill, finding ways to subvert the script's more patronizing elements while delivering a performance that satisfied both critics and audiences.
I'm furious that I grew up feeling disenfranchised, that there was some reason that someone thought that I was less than they were in the human experience.
And what does Glory say?
I'm first class.
This fury had been building for decades. Freeman's anger wasn't just about personal slights. It was about a systematic devaluation of black humanity that pervaded every aspect of American society. The entertainment industry was simply one manifestation of a broader system designed to convince black Americans that they were inherently inferior. But Glory allowed Freeman to channel that rage into a character who refused to accept second-class status. The late career breakthrough that began with Street Smart and continued through Driving Miss Daisy and Glory represented both triumph and tragedy. Freeman had finally achieved the recognition his talent deserved, but only after the industry had wasted his prime years and forced him to accept roles that reinforced rather than challenged racial stereotypes. The success came with the understanding that he was still operating within strict boundaries about what kinds of stories Hollywood wanted to tell about black characters. Freeman's emergence as a major star in his 50s proved that talent doesn't expire, but it also highlighted how many gifted performers never get the chance to demonstrate their abilities. For every Morgan Freeman who eventually breaks through, countless others remain unknown, not because they lack talent, but because they lack access to opportunities. The system's cruelty wasn't just individual, it was structural, designed to waste human potential on an industrial scale. But Freeman's breakthrough success also gave him something he had never possessed before: a platform to speak truth to power. The same defiant spirit that had gotten him labeled as a troublemaker during his wilderness years would soon put him on another collision course with industry expectations about how successful black performers should behave in public. Freeman's newfound success and platform didn't temper his willingness to challenge the system. It amplified it. The same defiant spirit that had survived decades of rejection now had the protection of box office success and critical acclaim, but Hollywood's tolerance for black dissent had strict limits. Unlike many black performers who learned to stay quiet about systemic racism to protect their careers, Freeman used his influence to challenge the very foundations of American racial discourse, starting with an institution that most people considered sacred and untouchable. His most controversial moment came during a 2005 interview with Mike Wallace on 60 Minutes, where Freeman questioned the entire concept of Black History Month. In an industry where black performers were expected to be grateful for any recognition, Freeman's critique was was considered heretical. He wasn't just criticizing a popular program, he was attacking the entire framework of racial tokenism that allowed institutions to avoid real structural change.
Black History Month you find ridiculous. Why?
You're going to relegate my history to a month?
Oh, come on.
What do you do with yours? Which month is White History Month? No, come on, tell me.
This wasn't just intellectual disagreement. This was Freeman rejecting the entire system of racial segregation that had defined his life since childhood. By questioning Black History Month, he was implicitly questioning every diversity initiative and symbolic gesture that allowed white institutions to maintain their fundamental structure while appearing progressive. His critique struck at the heart of liberal racial politics, arguing that separate recognition was inherently inferior recognition. The response was swift and brutal. Black intellectuals accused him of abandoning his responsibility to his community. White liberals were uncomfortable with having their well-intentioned gestures dismissed as inadequate. Conservatives tried to use his comments to justify their opposition to any racial awareness initiatives. Freeman found himself isolated from all sides of the political spectrum, exactly as he had been during his wilderness years in Hollywood.
How are we going to get rid of racism until...
Stop talking about it. I'm going to stop calling you a white man.
Yeah.
And I'm going to ask you to stop calling me a black man.
This colorblind ideology put Freeman at odds with civil rights leaders who argued that ignoring race meant ignoring ongoing discrimination. Critics accused him of pulling up the ladder behind him, using his success to argue that racism was no longer a significant barrier. The controversy revealed the impossible position that successful Black entertainers occupy. If they remain silent about racism, they're accused of abandoning their community. If they speak out in ways that make white audiences uncomfortable, they risk their careers. If they speak out in ways that make Black audiences uncomfortable, they're accused of betraying their race. Freeman chose a fourth path, speaking his truth regardless of the consequences. His willingness to challenge both sides made him a target from multiple directions. Industry executives who had been comfortable with Freeman as a safe, non-threatening Black star suddenly found themselves dealing with someone who questioned fundamental assumptions about American race relations. The same questions that had gotten him labeled as a troublemaker during his wilderness years were now being asked on national television. The backlash affected Freeman's career in subtle but measurable ways. Certain projects became unavailable. Some directors decided he was too controversial for mainstream fare. The industry's response proved his point about the persistence of racism. His willingness to speak honestly about race made him less valuable as a commodity. Despite the controversy, Freeman never backed down from his position, but the stress of being constantly attacked from all sides was taking its toll. The psychological burden would soon be compounded by physical trauma that would test his resilience in ways he never imagined. August 3rd, 2008, started as a typical evening for Morgan Freeman. He was driving near his Mississippi home with a female companion when their car veered off Highway 32, flipped multiple times, and crashed into a ditch. Emergency responders used the jaws of life to extract Freeman from the wreckage. The accident would change his life forever and add physical agony to the emotional burden he was already carrying. The injuries were devastating. Freeman's left shoulder was shattered, his elbow was crushed, and severe nerve damage left his left hand permanently impaired. At 71, an age when recovery becomes increasingly difficult, Freeman faced the possibility that his career might be over. The nerve damage was particularly cruel for an actor whose physical presence was central to his performances. Freeman's left hand became essentially useless, requiring him to wear a compression glove to prevent blood pooling.
If it happens right away, it's going to stop right away. That is a foregone conclusion.
Freeman had always understood that success in entertainment was temporary, but the accident forced him to confront his mortality in ways he hadn't anticipated. The physical limitations imposed by his injuries meant that certain types of roles were no longer possible. The constant pain made concentration difficult and affected his ability to perform basic tasks. For someone who had worked constantly throughout his career, the forced inactivity was psychologically devastating. Media coverage of the accident raised uncomfortable questions about Freeman's personal life. The female passenger wasn't his wife, leading to speculation about extramarital relationships. Freeman, who had always maintained strict privacy about his personal affairs, found his private struggles becoming public entertainment. The accident occurred during a particularly vulnerable period when his marriage was already strained. The recovery process was agonizing. Multiple surgeries, months of physical therapy, and the constant management of chronic pain became Freeman's new reality. The medical bills were crushing for someone whose career had already been damaged by political controversy. The combination of physical pain, personal turmoil, and professional uncertainty created a perfect storm of suffering. Despite the severity of his injuries, Freeman returned to work relatively quickly. His first post-accident film was Invictus, where he portrayed Nelson Mandela. The irony of playing a man who had overcome incredible hardship while dealing with his own limitations wasn't lost on Freeman. The role required him to embody resilience while privately struggling with chronic pain and diminished physical capacity. The accident highlighted Freeman's age and vulnerability in an industry obsessed with youth. At 71, he was already fighting ageism in Hollywood. The visible effects of his injuries made it even more difficult to compete for physically demanding roles. The chronic pain never fully resolved, creating a daily reminder of his mortality and limitations. Freeman's determination to continue working demonstrated the same resilience that had carried him through decades of industry rejection and racial controversy. But the accident marked a clear dividing line between when his body cooperated with his ambitions and when physical limitations became constant factors in his professional choices. Just as he was learning to manage his injuries and rebuild his career, life would deliver another devastating blow. Just as Freeman was learning to manage the constant physical pain from his car accident and navigate a career complicated by both injury and political controversy, life delivered what seemed like a final crushing blow. In August 2015, his step-granddaughter Edina Hines was brutally in New York City, stabbed to death on a Manhattan street by her boyfriend in what appeared to be a psychotic episode. For a man already carrying decades of accumulated trauma, this personal tragedy threatened to be the breaking point. Edina wasn't just Freeman's step-granddaughter. She was someone he had helped raise and considered a daughter. The loss was devastating enough on its own, but it became exponentially worse when tabloids began reporting unsubstantiated allegations that Freeman had been romantically involved with Edina. The accusations were never proven and were vehemently denied, but they added another layer of pain to an already unbearable tragedy.
Morgan has been romancing her. Now, she's only 28 years old. Morgan is 73.
But
so there's a little bit of an age difference there.
Yes, and they've been romancing for quite some
time.
These rumors, though unsubstantiated, demonstrated how Freeman's personal tragedies were transformed into entertainment for public consumption. The combination of sensationalized media coverage and genuine grief created an almost unbearable situation for someone already dealing with chronic pain, aging, and the aftermath of political controversy. The man who had survived systematic racism, decades of professional rejection, and severe physical injury now faced having his relationship with family member twisted into tabloid fodder. The investigation revealed Edina's struggles with mental health and substance abuse, issues that Freeman had been trying to help her address for years. The guilt and helplessness of being unable to save someone he loved became another burden for Freeman to carry alongside his physical pain and career challenges. Every headline about the case was a reminder of his failure to protect someone he cared about. The years following Edina's death brought additional challenges that seemed designed to destroy whatever remained of Freeman's reputation and peace of mind. In 2018, Freeman faced allegations of conduct from multiple women who claimed he had made inappropriate comments or gestures. Freeman denied the allegations but issued a public apology for making anyone feel uncomfortable. The number sign Me Too allegations came at a time when Freeman was particularly vulnerable. His health issues limited his ability to work consistently. The family tragedy had left him emotionally devastated, and now the controversy threatened to destroy the reputation he had built over decades. Several projects were canceled or postponed as the industry distanced itself from Freeman. The man who had once been considered America's most trusted voice was was now radioactive in Hollywood. The timing of the allegations raised questions about why they emerged when Freeman was dealing with other personal and professional challenges. Some supporters argued that he was being targeted because of his age and vulnerability, while critics maintained that powerful men should be held accountable regardless of their circumstances. Freeman found himself once again isolated and fighting for survival, just as he had been during his wilderness years. Freeman's response to the controversy reflected the same philosophical approach he had taken to racism and adversity throughout his career. Rather than engaging in lengthy denials or counterattacks, he acknowledged that perceptions matter and that his behavior had made some people uncomfortable, regardless of his intentions. It was the response of someone who had learned that survival sometimes requires accepting responsibility, even when you believe you've done nothing wrong. The combined effect of the car accident, family tragedy, and public controversies created a perfect storm that would have destroyed many people. Freeman's survival required the same resilience that had carried him through decades of industry rejection and racial hostility. But the stakes were higher and the resources for recovery were diminished. At 87, Freeman continues working, but at a reduced pace, his recent projects reflecting an awareness of his limitations and a desire to choose roles that matter rather than simply maintaining visibility. Freeman's final act is being written in real time, and it's unclear how the story will end. The man who once declared that success was temporary and that everyone gets 15 minutes of fame has far exceeded those modest expectations. But he has also learned that fame provides no protection against the fundamental challenges of human existence: aging, loss, and the constant struggle to maintain dignity in the face of life's inevitable hardships. The voice that once narrated documentaries about the universe now carries the weight of personal experience with suffering, survival, and the price of speaking truth in a world that often punishes honesty more severely than dishonesty. Anyway, that's it for this video, folks. Bye.